on, and it officially started on December 1st, 2022, and it's been a big change for us. Let me go over some basics. All of you will be familiar with what NIHR is trying to do. Now, remember these biomedical research centres, there were 20 before the last competition in 2022, and there's still 20. There's one new one and one got delisted. So it is possible to drop off the map. And you'll see there that, as usual, there's a special map just for London, but there's 20 of us around the country, and our northern partners are Newcastle, Manchester and Sheffield, and we're working increasingly closely with those northern partners. And remember, the aims of a BRC are really to be a springboard for research, to grow and do things. We're not supposed to fund everybody's research projects. We're supposed to give the seed money, the support money that springs and grows and gets more stuff done. And we're in that early translational phase. So the BRCs themselves are not involved in funding things. If I invented a new drug, that would fall into the BRC, and trialing it in animals or humans, especially early phase human trials, that's what the BRC is about. Once it gets out there, the big trials prove that it's successful, getting it into clinical practice is not the roles of the BRCs. There's other elements. And NIHR has tried to provide a range of products, if you like, across this pathway from coming up with an idea, putting it into people early phase, making sure it works in humans, and then getting it adopted into the NHS. So you can see there's a range of things. It is really easy to get lost in acronyms. I go to meetings where, and I don't mean just the medical acronyms for the diseases we deal with. I have some understanding of that because I had to go to med school. But there's so many acronyms for these different types of centres, and TRCs and AHSNs and CRNs, and I go to meetings where I get completely lost. Once I was at an honest meeting a few years ago where they asked an audience of very senior researchers who understood all the acronyms for all these different things, and one person put their hand up out of about 50 in the audience, and that was the person who I think had invented most of the acronyms. So they knew stuff. So some of you have been with our journey over a fair period of time and know this. So we started off with our first biomedical research unit with Paul Emery leading back in 2007. We were working on that. We got that in 2008 together with John Fisher and the bioengineers. So that was our starter project. And we got 3 successful iterations of that and became a BRC in 2017, Biomedical Research Centre, although we were still just a single theme. And our big expansion, as you know, this time was to go to 6 themes, recognising other areas of excellence in Leeds, and also, I think, recognising that there is, the big problems facing the NHS are multiple disease conditions, multi-morbid conditions, the people with diabetes, heart failure, blood pressure, arthritis, all those things, as well as mental health, which we don't have, sadly, within the BRC as an area of specialty. But those are the things that are going to break the NHS. These are the burden of problems that are really becoming a major issue. And in fact, they are an issue now. I think the other thing that helped us with our uplift in getting the big BRC was no doubt the Northern Levelling Up agenda. And I think that helped us a bit in the increased money. So our partners for the whole journey have been the University of Leeds and LTHT, both of which are big organisations in their own right. But what we were asked to do with this new BRC is find new partners. And so we brought in the University of York. And they're only linked currently through one of our 6 themes, through the haematology theme. But we'll be looking to see if we can expand that. And over the next couple of years, we're looking at other partners in Yorkshire, other universities, other researchers who are unlikely to ever get a BRC of their own. Who can we partner with? Who's got world-leading expertise in a disease area that we think could come in and partner with us? And we're keeping our eye around the whole region, thinking about York's an obvious one, but there are probably other areas around too that we're looking at. This was our strategy for the document, that we be patient-led. And for those of you who've been with us a long while, you've seen the evolution of PPI. Now, I won't go into, Amy's going to talk on PPI, but gosh, haven't things changed a lot from the mid-noughties until now? When I think of the journey of PPI, and for a researcher, because I sit here wearing a researcher's hat, gosh, it's been an incredible transformative journey over that time. And I think Leeds represents what's happened across the country in terms of that transformation. We want to try and improve the speed. You'll be aware that it takes 17 years on average from an idea to be adopted into clinical practice. Isn't that amazing? It's amazingly depressing, 17 years. So can we get that down a bit? And that's part of the ways of doing that, is to make sure that you engage early on. You think about, is this going to be useful? You would be amazed how much research is done that people haven't thought about whether it's ever going to be useful in the clinic eventually. And even big pharma, who you think have lots of money and can do stuff, have done these sort of things in the past, and have had to, one very major company I can think of, had to change their whole attitude about 12, 13 years ago, when they realized all their basic scientists were coming up with wonderful drugs that didn't actually treat big clinical problems. They were very, very niche problems they were working on. So they realized you have to have some sort of communication. What am I developing? What's the clinical problem we're trying to solve? Now go back and develop a product. And that's really what we try to get our researchers to think about. What's your clinical grand challenge or problem you want to cure, help, reduce? Then you go and do the research. So goes without saying these days that our work is collaborative, that equality, diversity, and inclusion is integral to what we do, and that we try and grow people who are going to work in this area and work in research. That's becoming increasingly hard, trying to get junior docs and non-medical clinical staff. This is our team. So Hemant Pandit on my right there is our Deputy Director, and he's also a workstream lead within Surgical Technologies. David Jane running Surgical, David Beach in Cardiometabolic, and Morgan now taken over the musculoskeletal theme. Mark Wilcox from Antimicrobial Resistance, Phil Quirk running Pathology, and Eve and Gordon Cook from Eve from York, and Gordon from Leeds running Haematology. And I'm going to discuss a little bit about each of these themes. These themes are not all equi-sized. MSK had a long history, as you know. So MSK has 7 work streams in it, for example. Some of the others have 2 or 3. So altogether now there's 19 work streams within these 6 disease areas. And we've got to now make sure our core team covers a whole lot of different disease areas. And we were very lucky this year. Medina, who many of you will know, has really been a sole hand, especially in the year or 2 running up to the last BRC application, and really helped carry us a lot. And her hair was falling out, or being pulled out a lot, both by herself and by others trying to get at her. But we were fortunate to appoint Steve Rose as our BRC operations director within the new BRC. Steve has brought a heap of experience and has been great growing our team. So Medina now supported. George Davis there has done a lot of work on our reporting and will increasingly work at our liaison across our groups. Alex becoming our business manager, Amy, you know, Anne-Marie and Carol, you probably know, and I'm not talking on academic capacity development today, but as we've said, that's a really key area for us to grow. Recently, we've appointed Cynthia Iglesias as our EDI lead because we have ambitions. It's not enough to say, we're going to be integrated, we're going to be even and level-handed. You've got to work at a lot of this stuff, and we know there's a lot of unconscious bias in what we do. And I'm a white male, older person sitting here saying things, and I don't even know what I don't know. So we've got to have an active strategy, and Cynthia's just working with us on our EDI strategy. Julia Brown from Clinical Trials Unit leads our methodology group. Francesco, and just within the last couple of weeks, Jeff Hall, who's a prof in the cancer area, are our IT co-leads. And again, without getting into it today, our IT side has been hampered. We've not been able to get smooth operating of a number of processes between researchers, access to materials, access to patient databases. A lot of this has been haphazard and intermittent or based around single successful projects. And we want to make that smoother. And that's really, I hope, going to happen in this next year to come. That's, you know, we've spent a lot of time trying to understand the problems. Now we're up to solutions. We've got a health economist. Why is a health economist important here? Because if you don't plan ahead, as I said, if you're not planning, what are your interventions going to be useful for? Then how can you know if they're going to be adopted into practice? If I invent a wonderful drug, but it costs £500,000 per patient, and believe me, there are drugs now out there that cost that much money to the NHS, then I know it's not going to be used on 500,000 patients in the NHS. So we must understand cost effectiveness. NICE in the UK has been really good at doing that over the years, understanding what's the amount for benefit that you can afford to charge for something. So having a health economist embedded early in our processes in developing new interventions is just a sensible thing to do. And most people putting in grants now, even though they're early down the line, have to be thinking about where will this end up in humans. Richard Wakefield, a lot of you will know, has been with us for many years, and Phil Robinson joined us this year as a radiologist. These are our imaging leads, and we've got imaging in both musculoskeletal and in the cardiology themes. So now this is a bit of overview. Some of this will be a bit advanced for me. It might be for you too. So let's just talk about some of the themes. So antimicrobial resistance. Why is that important? Well, within about 5 years, it's predicted that deaths due to antimicrobial resistance will surpass cancer deaths in the country. So this is not a small issue. This is a major issue for the country. And we've been fortunate that Mark Wilcox and his team really have been world leaders in one particular bug, Clos difficile it's called, something that happens to people whose gut bugs, or what we call the microbiome, get wiped out when they're sick in hospital and when they've had lots of different antibiotics that change the mixture of the bugs that we normally have in our gut. These are the things that set you up for getting antimicrobial resistance, for getting bugs that are resistant to traditional antibiotics. So they focused on Clos difficile, which is one of the major bugs. You'll all have heard about MRSA or golden staph, but Clos difficile is another one of those big important bugs. Causes diarrheal illnesses. You have to isolate people in wards. Lots of problems happen because of Clos difficile. And years ago, this group developed, it's sort of like a big room. They call it their whole gut model. It's a big room full of fancy test tubes and all sorts of equipment. that are useful for understanding how the normal bowel works, and then how do you change the bugs within it when you give them different antibiotics. So they're doing work to see if they can identify, repurpose some old antibiotics and see if they can work for things. Lots of companies come to them saying, will our antibiotic, how does it work in your large gut model? And now they're developing some very fancy microchip models that do the same thing as their large gut model. The reason being, you can scientifically screen lots and lots of potential new therapies, antibiotic therapies, for example. But if you've got a model to run them through, you can tell if those therapies are going to be useful or not in humans. So it saves a lot of time before you get to clinical trials. That's why it fits within a BRC. Remember, this is early translational research. So this group's doing really well. And in their first year, they've run a number of important events with all the big knobs from the NHS being involved. They've got a new clinical lectureship looking at CDI's Clos difficile, looking at the diagnostics for Clos difficile. They've got a new PhD student, and they've also done some seed cord funding to try and get people giving small amounts of money from within their work stream to get people involved. So one of the projects involved vaginal candidiasis, another common problem. So they're working in quite a number of areas. I'm really happy to have antimicrobial resistance within the BRC, because I think it's such a big area, and it's not a sexy area in the sense of it won't get front page news until people are dying everywhere of the problem. They've also worked well with industry. And remember, I said at the start, the point of BRCs is to be trampolines. They're to be places where you do basic work, get expansion funding. Yes, we're doing this research, come in and help fund us, come and do this. This is another good example of people who are raising funding on the background of their BRC money. Cardiometabolic disease, you'll be aware that in the north of England, we've got real problems and disparities between the north and the south, and cardiovascular disease is one of the big disparities. And of course, that's even locality very dependent. We've got areas in Leeds, very close to where I'm talking from now in Chapel-Allerton, that have amongst the worst cardiovascular mortality figures in the UK. So there are pockets of issues. There are pockets related to patient groups, to certain patient groups that have much worse mortality, and all those things become very important. Diabetes is on the increase, and both cardiovascular disease, blocking your arteries, stops your heart muscle working properly, leading to heart failure when the heart pump is not working well. So blocked arteries lead to heart failure. Diabetic people get more blocked arteries, more heart failure. And this group is particularly interested in that link between heart disease and diabetes. Now, they've got 3 work streams. This is a really active. Cardiovascular disease has been one of our premier groups in Leeds for 20 years or more. MSK, cardiovascular, and cancer were always the 3 strongest areas across Leeds over my 25 years here. And they do imaging work to look at fancy stuff with MRI, looking at what they call energetics, how well the heart muscle is working. So we know blocked arteries leads to damaged heart muscle. They're trying to reduce that damage to heart muscle that keeps you going and predicts your life duration after you've had heart attacks. Not surprisingly, things that thin the blood, antiplatelet, platelets being your clotting cells, and anticoagulant therapies are the things that make people have clots, die, strokes, other things. And they've got a really powerful group within cardiology that are developing new antiplatelet and anticoagulant therapies. And they're really world leading and have already done a spin-off company from that group. And then they want to get into some very basic science, how to advance diagnostics and treatments for people getting at risk of getting problems, but also once you've had a heart attack or have heart failure, how do we predict who's going to do worse? Who should we give more therapy to? And they've had a very big year in terms of they've renewed their British Heart Foundation chair and their program grant that goes with it, which means this is a well-funded group. Celtic, led by David Beach, is a spin-off company. They're looking at calcium. Ca2 plus is calcium, the molecule. And calcium is really important. When your heart muscle cells are damaged, the flow of calcium in and out of the cells changes. Now, calcium keeps your cells healthy and pumping all right. And if they're damaged and the calcium flow is changed, then that's one of the issues leading to heart muscle fatigue. And what David's been doing is developing things that modulate that calcium flow in cells, into and out of cells. And some of these look very good as potential therapeutic agents, drugs, oral molecules that will be able to work on heart failure. So that's pretty exciting. And that's why I think that company may well do well. We've got youngsters, early career researchers getting into cardiac imaging biomarkers. And there's been a big grant awarded between Maya Butch, who used to be here with us in rheumatology in Leeds, now in Manchester, and Sven Plain in cardiology, looking at a national thing to look at how people with immune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, who are at increased risk of cardiovascular disease, it's trying to understand what those people are doing, what we can do to prevent that in people with immune diseases. So it's lupus, RA, lots of diseases that have increased risk of cardiovascular disease. So that's a big national program. Now, hematology is one of our new themes, and I mentioned it's in collaboration with York. One of the great strengths of hematology is we've got a thing called the Hematology Malignancy Diagnostic Service, or HMDS, that works across the whole of the area in the map you can see on your screen. And it has the data collected on many, many, many tens of thousands of people with different types of leukemias, multiple myeloma. This is the sort of zone this group is playing in. And some of these diseases are uncommon, and some are sadly not so uncommon. And there's been some lovely breakthroughs in hematology cancer treatments in the last 25 years through targeting individual molecules that drive the cancers. But some of them still do very poorly, and some respond to therapies quickly and then relapse. And so a lot of work is going on here at understanding the immune basis of why people relapse when treated with certain therapies. There's some work around multiple myeloma, which you might know is a very destructive malignancy that once had mortality rates of, average survival, 5-year survivals of 18 months. So really a devastating disease. Now there's been an expansion of some new drugs, and now we're understanding more about the drivers and inflammation driving that condition. So better survival for people, but how do we make sure they stay in remission? And there's a whole host of work from this group, I think, coming based on their broad, really world-leading access to millions of patient samples and with these diseases. Each of the updates I'm giving you, by the way, you will hear over the next year or two, you'll hear the groups presenting their individual work, I hope. And hematology, again, early career researchers getting fellowships, big grants, in particular from Sanisha Savage, who is one of our now newly awarded professors who works in immunology and rheumatology, and he works with some very rare diseases that affect your immune system. Vexus is one of those very rare diseases that affects immune system. So he has to work nationally. There is collections of bloods from these people that they can do genetic studies in where's the abnormality, can we reverse the abnormality? Lots of work going on in this theme. What about pathology? So pathology is a rather dry subject often, I think, for young researchers. People think of this as looking down microscopes, but it's really evolved a long time. I started my medical specialist training in pathology and hematology actually 100 years ago, but pathology has really improved. And this area of our BRC, the first area of work stream within pathology is looking at improved screening for bowel cancer. And you know, bowel cancer is still a major killer in this country and a major disabler for lots of people. So they're looking at technology to improve screening for this, including looking at the microbiome. I mentioned your gut flora, and there's now ways of looking at microbiome to see if the changes there reflect underlying cancers. And some of this screening is moving very close to getting into humans. It looks like it's going to be better than our current screening. So at present, you'd have a fecal blood, occult blood test. You probably get sent, some of you have been sent these things to test your poo with to check if you've got microscopic blood. But these testings that Phil Quirk and his group are developing look like they'll be even more sensitive than fecal occult bloods for doing cancer screening. They also look very much, they've got magnificent whole wall microscopic video screening now of tissue sections that allows them to really understand where does the cancer end. You'll know that when a surgeon cuts a cancer out, he sends it off to the lab to make sure the edges of it don't have any cancer cells in it. And when you detect cancer early, and maybe you fry it with an electric probe in theatre, you're never sure if you've killed all the cancer. Have you killed enough of the cancer? Can you stop it spreading later? And the ability to look at this tissue in such microscopic way and to add in now artificial intelligence that predicts response to chemotherapy as well, this is really going to move cancer therapy forward. So this is very exciting what's going on. And this group in pathology have done really well in the last year. Again, early career researchers, PhD students, and new external sponsors for their research from pharma, from Roche, but also grant funding. So you're starting to see, I hope, a commonality across all our work themes or our streams, that they're producing what they should be doing within the BRC, academically moving the field forward, growing partners, and growing a workforce that cares. Musculoskeletal disease you'll be most familiar with, and there's 7 work streams. We had 6 within the old BRC, and we've added 1 in here. You'll be familiar with the work started by Paul, and Calvi and Mankey are now involved in running this really early RA and pre-RA. Now that we've got the anti-CCP antibody that helps us predict years before you get the disease, they're trying to refine those models in big patient collections and saying, well, how can we be better about working out who we should monitor more? I see many people in clinic who've got low titer anti-CCP antibodies. They don't have rheumatoid arthritis. Around the country, you may just get sent away and told, come back if your joint pain gets worse. And that's not really very good. So they're trying to come up with ways of picking the people who are going to progress to rheumatoid arthritis. And they're also working on what therapies you should give those people, because we may not want to throw everything at people early on. And of course, patients won't want strong therapies if they haven't actually got the disease. There are many issues to be explored here about how you prevent diseases that people haven't really got into. It's all right for doctors to say, I know what bad disease looks like. If I've only got some mild joint aches and nothing much else, I may not want a JAK inhibitor or a TNF inhibitor or some of the drugs that bring with them a lot of different side effects. preventing psoriatic arthritis. About maybe a quarter, it depends on where you look, 10 to 20% of people with the skin disease psoriasis develop a nasty inflammatory arthritis involving their joints and the tendons around their joints. And we're not very good at predicting who will get it. In fact, we're terrible at predicting who will get it. We're terrible at diagnosing PSA. Often has years before it's diagnosed, especially in the spine. And I think it was under-recognised that people with PSA can get arthritis in their spine. So that group is looking at cohorts of people with psoriasis and the early onset of PSA and trying to work out what are the features that predict what happens that you develop PSA. So if you like, some areas very similar to the rheumatoid arthritis theme. Similarly, in connective tissue disease, Ed Vital, who leads our lupus group, is picking large cohorts of people and has developed a large cohort that he's now expanding, of people with funny antibodies in their bloodstream when they come in with vague aches and pains. But not enough for us to say, you've got immune disease X. So what we do is he's following those groups of patients to see who develops lupus or other immune diseases and who are the predictors. So I think you're starting to see commonality across those first three themes. The themes is prevention. This is prevention. For vasculitis, we're bad at diagnosing. Some of you will have heard of a disease called giant cell arteritis, which involves your large blood vessels, including those that run to your eyes, and people can go blind very quickly with this disease when it comes on. So we've got quite a program of work around early detection of giant cell arteritis and trying to work out which groups we should prescribe steroids to, which are our major therapy for this, and who might benefit from having other immune suppression. That leads into glucocorticoid therapy. You'll have heard of PMR. It affects about 2% of the population over 55. Very rare for it to get it under the age of 60, really. And it's sudden onset of pain, stiffness in your shoulder girdle and your pelvis. Gets better by itself over a couple of years often, but that's a painful, stiff couple of years. So most people get steroids, and unfortunately, we think a quarter to a half of people stay on steroids way too long. And steroids cause a whole lot of problems. They cause you to put on weight, your skin to fall off, and most importantly, osteoporosis and cardiovascular disease. So reducing the amount of steroid you get and working out, do other drugs help reduce the amount of steroid you get? Shouldn't you have gone on to steroid, or can we use lower doses all along? All those things are being looked at in the PMR group. I run the osteoarthritis group, so I won't talk too much to that today. That seems selfish. But we're trying to look at where does the pain come from in joints? You've heard me talk about this before. We still don't know. But more importantly, the relationship between pain and low-grade inflammation. We know obesity causes low-grade inflammation, and we know people who are obese have more joint pain. Now, it's obvious to say, oh, that's due to weight bearing through their joints. They carry more weight through their joints. But we've known for years there are signals that inflammation relates to pain. And we know from a large trial we did with the company Novartis that reducing that inflammation in the blood without even knowing where it comes from reduces your rates of joint replacement very substantially. So there's a whole lot to be investigated about the relationship between low-grade inflammation, which is probably obesity-driven, and joint pain and your need for joint replacements. And joint replacements don't always work well, as you know. So our group that works with the bioengineers, Tony Redman and Ruth Wilcox in the university, are looking at, again, sorting out how to make sure joint replacements work better. But again, can they model that so that we know before we put joint replacements into people who's going to do better? And they do a lot of laboratory work to understand how long joint replacements will last. But now they're getting into better models that do joint weight bearing, because a lot of stuff that was done in the lab really wasn't weight bearing enough, I think. So lots of work going on for them. And again, big grants. You've got to have a good acronym, a good name for your grant to get the money. Periscope is a grant that's looking at people on biologics and whether you should or shouldn't stop biologic therapies around the time of surgery. That's a big issue for people whose disease has been hard to control. You get them controlled and then they need a joint replacement or something else done. You can't just stop their drugs. They then have big problems in their rehab and getting over surgery. So that's a good big randomized trial. Sterling is trying to work out if you can give methotrexate as well as steroid and reduce the amount of steroid you have in people with polymyalgia. DMAP is developing an online digital program for people with hand osteoarthritis, elbow pain, forearm pain, carpal tunnel syndrome, and seeing if we can intervene with people. And recently we're working with our systems engineers to see if we can work out flow through the NHS. And this is a pilot grant we've got called Seismic that tries to work out how do we improve flow of patients, for example, through an emergency department. How do we improve flow of patients? How do we make sure the right patients with heart failure, diabetes, and stroke, who are a big burden of patients, a big burden on the health system, especially in underdeprived areas, can we get to them and improve outcomes? That's the start of a much bigger working between the university and the trust. Okay, last theme is surgical technologies. And they're working in two areas: precision sort of technology-based surgery, and then improving healing. And I'll just put on a couple of areas they involve. This is workstream 1, led by David Jane, who's the theme lead. And it's looking at, this is immersive technology. This is virtual reality to help augment rehabilitation after surgery and after stroke. So a lot of work going on there. Some other pretty exciting stuff, I think, is trying to understand robotic colonoscopy. So this is where you can see that magnet and that robot on the right side there. It's tracking through, in this case, a fake and artificial bowel, but this is getting close to being able to do this in humans. So this will be, I've said before that bowel cancer is a big problem for the community. Just getting people to have their scopes and doing all that is a big burden on the NHS. So can we come up with more novel ways to screen and scope people with robotic colonoscopy? Pretty exciting stuff, this. And that's getting close to its first in human trials. So this is really exciting stuff. And the other stuff there on nanotechnology is using nanobubbles to disrupt cancer. So to use this for diagnosis of early bowel cancer, but also for treatment of early bowel cancer. It's another talk in itself. A lot of this stuff is very exciting. And then the other work stream is looking at sensors for some people to improve outcome after they have knee replacements. And also we're looking at how to promote bone healing. You'll be aware that many people who have traumatic fractures, there's a lot of them in car accidents around every day, have all these pins and plates put in, but even then the bone doesn't heal properly. And a lot of work is going on trying to promote bone healing and using various products and stuff that you put in to make that, some natural products, some designer-made products to try and promote healing. And of course, you've got to have things you put in that don't allow bugs to grow in joints, because that in bones, in damaged bones, because that's a big problem. And also in workstream 2, they're developing ways of monitoring foot load in people who have diabetes. Diabetic people get a lot of ulcers, they get infected, they lose their leg, they lose half their leg because of infections. So this is about reducing foot ulcers by using very fancy tracking technology, but the aim is to come up with personalized insoles that you can put in your shoe that will change how you walk and reduce your chances of ulcers. So this is a work, or you can see everything here has been aimed at really practical common problems down the line. And lastly, from surgery, they're starting to put sensors inside joint replacements. So not only will you, when you go through the scanner at the airport, the alarm go off, but now we'll be able to track your steps, understand how you weight bear through that joint replacement, and iteratively improve joint replacements over time. So this is not yet used in any patients, but it's getting there, I think, within the next year or two. So I could talk for 6 or 7 hours. You'd all fall asleep, but you're starting to get a feel, I hope, of the breadth now. The BRC looks like a different animal. It's a much bigger animal. And I haven't mentioned the work done to grow our academic capacity. I've mentioned IT infrastructure, since it's one of those things that I think has been holding back various research groups. And I really want to make a priority that we get that sorted. And Amy, you're going to go on and discuss the huge growth and where PPIEP has gone.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you for that fascinating presentation. I think you certainly got through a lot of years' activity in quite a brief update. So that was really useful with those headlines. So if I move on to the patient and public involvement slides that I've pulled together, and I think these will just naturally, like looking through them, draw upon some of the things that have been mentioned around health inequalities. So just bear with me 1 second whilst I get my screen up to share. Okay. So I think, yeah, the first slide that I've got is it speaks immediately to the discussion around health inequalities. So there's an explicit need for our research to follow patient need, and in particularly how we work with those who are classed as underserved populations. And I think patient and public involvement and engagement lends itself really well to this area, because there are threads of community engagement, community outreach, community development within the work that we do. And by working with communities out in the wider public, so moving away from the BRC and working within the community, we can actually use methods around involvement and engagement to then think about how we make research that's inclusive for people. And by making research that's inclusive for people, we'll get a better idea about the outcomes of those the research, which is more reflective of the wider community, particularly those who are often underserved when it comes to not just research, but health and care services that are provided to them as well. And the second change that we've got as well is the additional P. So you'll notice that there's been a further P added to our acronym, and that's around participation. And I think it's sort of worth saying that as an involvement and engagement team, our role isn't to recruit participants to studies. That very much sits within the clinical teams, but it can help us again think about, well, how do we get more participants in studies which are representative of a wider group of communities? Again, coming back to the underserved populations as well. So how do we create research that's inclusive for them? So those are the two sort of big additional changes that we've had in terms of patient and public involvement from the NIHR. And if I move on to our next slide, which is about the strategy for patient and public involvement. So our vision is, sorry, I just need to adjust on my screen, there we go, is to drive meaningful research, which is led by patient and public voice, to deliver research that's relevant, inclusive, and impactful to our communities, particularly those who are most at need. So this is where that health inequalities element comes into patient and public involvement. And often when I present about this, I've got a slide which shows a kitten with some balled up rolls of twine. And I do this because I think EDI, so equality, diversity and inclusion, and patient and public involvement are so entwined. They are different things, but there's certainly that entwinement between the two of them as well. And that comes back to creating research opportunities that are inclusive for all. So if I just speak a little bit more about the particular aims within our strategy. So the first about embedding public partnerships and co-production in everything that we do. So through embedding a culture of patient and public involvement at all levels, we can develop and deliver PPI activities that are reflective of people's needs and inclusive for all. So for example, making sure that people are represented within governance, that we have training available to people, and making sure that people are supported in the activity as well. So thinking about setting up mentors for new people who are getting involved in our activity. Ensuring that PPI is representative of underserved communities. So as I've already mentioned, thinking about the community engagement approach and working outside of the hospital, not just in the hospital as we've done previously. And the third is building upon and increasing awareness and engagement in research activity through tailored approaches. So making sure that the communications that we do are accessible for all, that it's communicated in a way that's clear and understandable and relevant to communities as well. And Libby's already been doing some great work in this area in taking Ask for Research out to community organisations, and also a project called Community Conversations that she's going to speak about shortly. And the fourth one is about recognising the contribution and value of public contributors. For a lot of people, the systems that we use to cover people's recognition payments and expenses create a barrier for them. At the end of the day, there's nothing that we can do around benefit and tax implications. Unfortunately, that's out of our hands. That sits with HMRC and the Department of Work and Pensions. But what we can do is think about some of our internal systems and what's meaningful to people in terms of recognition for their time. And particularly as we are working with more underserved communities and we are at a period of a cost of living crisis as well. Area 5 is working as one NIHR in the Leeds City region. So there's a lot of different elements of the NIHR represented in Leeds, which is brilliant, but as staff members, we struggle to navigate that and understand all the acronyms that we use and all the different bodies. So as people who aren't working in that area, that's going to be even more harder to understand. And we need to be really careful with that in terms of making sure that our messaging is consistent and concise across the board, and people's experiences are the same and equitable as well. And finally, around planning, monitoring, and evaluating impact. So this is an area where we really need to be stronger. So it's not just in thinking about evaluation activities, it's about the impact of the research as a whole, the impact of our involvement in engagement activities. So what's changed as a result of that? Where can we see that impact in maybe 5 years' time? And also just having systems in place to remember that we need to do that as well, because you can be working on something and you get it going and then that doesn't finish for another few years. So it's making sure that you've always got that in mind, that you do need to go back and think about that impact. And we've had BRC funding for a year now. And I think the thing that I'm certainly proudest of in terms of involvement and engagement is the fact that we've got a team now, and this couldn't have been done without the support of senior management, particularly Philip, who's sort of advocated for us needing to grow the PPI team to deliver the activity that is now required of us, but also those who are already involved in PPI as in our members and sort of coming on that journey alongside us as well. So we're now in a position which has just gone from me looking after patient public involvement to having a further 4 people. So we've got myself, who's sort of just looking after the team, looking after the activity that we're doing and making sure we're achieving what we've set out in our strategy. And we've got Libby, who's here today with us and who you've met a couple of times as our senior PPI officer. So Libby brings in a wealth of expertise around communications and engagement, and accessibility and creativity. So she's going to be speaking a little bit about a project that she's been working on and has led very well within the last 6 months of being with us. We've got Sharonjeet Bohan, who is our community PPI coordinator. Now, Sharonjeet's role is not just exciting to us at the Biomedical Research Centre, but also to the wider NIHR. And this is because we've got a member of the team actually based within the community. Working through an organisation called Healthwatch Leeds, which means that we've got an instant connection to the voluntary community faith sector, but also that we've got somebody embedded in the community, engaging with people out there. And Sharonjeet comes with years and experience in this area as well. So she's absolutely key component of our team and what we need to deliver. And we've got Julie Corrigan, who some of you may know through our cardiovascular clinical research facility. She works with us supporting cardiometabolic PPI because that's quite a large area. So we have her area support 1 day a week. And we have TJ, who's our administrative officer. So having admin support within the PPI team's been incredibly helpful as well. And TJ's picked it up very quickly, and I'm quite happy with the way that we've got that managed now. And I'm sure you've all had contact with TJ as well. So if I move on to the next slide, which is Libby, who is going to tell us a little bit about our Community Conversations project. So Libby, over to you.
Hello everyone. So as we established at the start, I'm having issues with audio because I'm currently at the university. I was helping facilitate a seminar on PPI with our next generation of researchers, our year 2 medical students. So it was great, but it does leave me in a slightly awkward position where I can't hear you, but hopefully you can hear me, and I'll be nice and brief going over community conversations. So this was a project in partnership with Healthwatch and Leeds Involving People. They supported us with getting connected with underserved members of the community and basically letting them have a bit more of an open forum to tell us about what they understand about health research, what they need support-wise, what are some of the barriers, and to start build this relationship with these community members so that going forward over the next, what is now 4 years, we can continue that relationship and make some real positive change for them here at the BRC. So on the slide here, you can see some of the artwork that's come out of it. The one in the centre is from one of the local artists who actually attended. So he's one of the community members who had his voice heard. And yeah, it's one of, I really love this illustrations. It kind of shows exactly what we're working with diverse communities who want to have their voice heard and need a better way of engaging. And we had touched on topics such as issues with technology, some of the barriers in different communities, being able to understand, the need for in-person support, and all of it has been really, really positive, and we now have these communities we can keep going back to. So our goals for 2024, as Amy touched on with Ask the Research, was taking that out to their spaces. And then on that same vein, Sharonjeet and myself have started attending community events. So in the last few weeks, I went to the International Day for Disabled People that was hosted at the Leeds City Museum, and got to meet with members of the community and some third sector organisations who had been, again, supporting people with disabilities. That was a fantastic thing. We've already got some great connections we're going to be working on over the first and second quarter of 2024. And then last week, I went to the Carers Roadshow, which was supported by the Leeds City Council. And also Healthwatch were also there. We're very good friends with Healthwatch. They've been really great with supporting us with this, and again connected with members of the community. So that's something I'm really interested in, and as Amy mentioned, making material available in different ways. So it's not just in text. We've got videos. I've been working on so making sure the Ask the Researcher recordings go up, and we have some podcasts we're working on coming from Community Conversations. So going into the new year, I'm really positive about pushing forward some of these different ways of communicating and making sure we have much more accessible information out there for all new members of our community and existing members of our community. I think that's mostly what I want to touch on. I'll pass you back to Amy.
Thanks very much, Libby. And I think the exciting thing about the Community Conversations project is that it was actually funded as a grant through the NIHR. So we actually got funding awarded with partners at Keele University to use the same model, working with community groups in Keele and Leeds as a bit of a pilot, I suppose, about how we work with community organisations, and almost going in with that blank sheet of paper to understand what their perspectives are around research and what we can do with building upon that to make sure that we've got sustainable relationships with them moving forward. And one of the things that's really good is because this hangs off the BRC, it means that we can sustain those relationships as well. So one of the biggest criticisms of PPI in research from communities is often that it's described as parachute PPI, where you go in, you consult, you take from the community, you might offer some sort of recognition payment, but ultimately you never go back into the community. And because we've got the resources available to us in Leeds, it means that we can actually sustain these relationships. And I feel confident about our ability to do that over the next few years in a way that's sort of meaningful on both sides. So I'm just going to come to the questions in the chat.